Hello and welcome to Ed Talks. My name is Janay Nugent. I'm a Board of Governors teaching chair and a member of the Department of History here at the University of Lethbridge. We are located on traditional Blackfoot lands, Oki, Nitsu, Kawawa. Welcome to our friends and neighbors. Today we have the great pleasure of speaking to Don McIntyre, who is a faculty member in the Dhillion School of Business here at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome to Ed Talks.
Okay, thank you.
I'm really excited to get to interview you today and to chat with you about teaching. Every time I hear you speak, I always learn so much, and so I was really excited.
But no pressure,
But
right?
no pressure at all, none. None whatsoever. But I always treasure every time that I get to speak to you because I do learn so very much. And I'd like to ask you if you might share with us your journey of how you got here to the University of Lethbridge and your teaching journey so that our viewers can get a chance to know who you are a little bit.
My background is actually in law. So I was a practicing lawyer. I went back and did a Master's of Law and I'm just finishing a PhD. While I was doing that, I started teaching leadership and management for the Indigenous Leadership Program at the BAM Center. So I did a number of years there, and then at some point what sort of became apparent was that those two worlds were actually merging. That when I was talking to Indigenous leaders about their nation and about their corporations and with organizations and how they could work with Indigenous nations. As a lawyer, that the business part of it started to come in, and that I started to speak in a language that actually merged a lot of them together. I then applied here at what was Native American Studies. They've now changed to Indigenous Studies. But I applied here and got a contract for a year, a one-year contract, and did it for a couple of years. While I was on that contract, I started working with Bob Boudreau on some outside projects. And he said, if you are ever leaving, before you leave, let me know. And then my contract ended and I said, Bob, I'm leaving. And he said, give me some time. And then I applied here to the Dhillion School, which was the Faculty of Management, applied and did a one-year contract and then became tenured track.
Right. Oh, that's excellent. So what sort of projects were you working on?
We were looking at the possibility of how University of Lethbridge could do more executive training, more smaller, like faster, smaller courses that people could come in and have in a week and learn. So that's still an ongoing project that we're still working on. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to say about it.
Yeah, so just moving forward on different potential ways of offering courses and that sort of a thing.
Different ways of looking at how people can get knowledge, can get information. You know, there's, and I think it's an actual push across higher institutes of higher learning that we're recognizing the fact that it's a far too limited group that is actually getting, you know, I'm not sure if I were to go back and start again on my learning journey that I would ever have managed to get into a university. Right. It was a series of flukes and it just seems hard. But education shouldn't be. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the sort of buzzwords are diversity and inclusion, right? And trying to expand our reach of who can access the university education and that sort of thing, which I think is a fantastic thing to be engaged in.
Yeah. At UBC, we used to have similar to the Penny Building. There was a There was a building that they leased where they would have, you know, one-day courses, and it was open to everyone, so that people, it was on the downtown east side, and people on the downtown east side could come, take a one-day course, or in some cases they would arrange to say, if you come every week, you will get you will have the equivalent of an English course.
Right.
In a lot of cases, it wasn't about the credits at all. It was about people who just wanted the opportunity to learn what was happening at the university.
Right.
And that sort of approach is, I think, I know it's a buzzword, but actually I think in some ways it's been my always, you know, how do we include people? How do we include, you know, the disenfranchised or the disillusioned?
Right.
In the process of saying, you know, we were talking earlier and I was saying, I always feel like every course, every class, you should walk away both as a faculty and as a student, because I think those are always blurred lines. But you should walk away going, I learned something amazing. That in some ways is what I strive for in those meetings, is to be able to say, this is what I learned that was amazing. You know, and it may be the approach someone took to one of the readings, it may be an approach to how somebody spoke, it may be, you know, I don't think it has to be this Socratic, I stood up and said something amazing that you wrote in your book.
Right, yeah.
I remember a lot of times, I don't do it as much anymore, but when I was first started teaching, I would watch the students and they would just write whatever I said.
Right.
So I started saying stuff that was like obviously not true. And then would say, oh no, that's not right. And I would say something else and I would watch them, this was a long time ago, but I would watch them erase and write in the next thing that I said. And I would just stand there and do it until somebody went, until people realized that they should put their pens or, you know, stop typing for a second to actually take in what we were talking about.
Right.
And if you do that early enough in a class, in the course, what happens is people realize, oh, actually, I better listen, because it's not just going to be in the book. It's not going to be, you know, it has to be about that critical thinking. It has to be about looking beyond the textbook and, you know, on what I want to know. What I want to know as an educator is what you think as a student. Where am I getting it right or am I getting it wrong from your perspective? Because there should be an opportunity to dialogue. Right.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, right? Because the students do want to, because they want to get it right, right? They want to write it all down and they want to get it right. And you know, that's laudable, absolutely. But yeah, a lot of it is about the stories, right? And learning a message through the stories and figuring out what they think about those particular perspectives. And
so often, because there is a type of student, I don't like to put them in categories, but there is a type of student who, and they all know who they are, and they're all very proud of it, because they will ask the question, is this going to be on the exam? And you know, and my answer is, it's a coined answer now. It's like, if it's in the class, absolutely.
Right.
And they're like, you know, it's, why would I have this conversation if it couldn't potentially be on the exam?
Yeah. Why would we cover it? Does storytelling play a role in your classes? You were talking, we spoke earlier and you were talking about storytelling as being an area that...
I don't think of myself as particularly smart. I am just particularly persistent.
Okay.
And so the way that I have always, the way I was taught to learn is to find the right story. So I'm Anishinaabeg and Scottish, and my uncles and my grandfather always taught me, these are our stories. And our stories will tell you everything. They will tell you our laws. They will tell you how to be among people. They will tell you how to live a good life. All you have to do is find the right story. So when I'm teaching, a lot of times I am actually looking for the story to make my point. So those students who are like, is this going to be on the exam? Their question is usually, okay, this is not how I think a classroom should look. So that's just a nice story, right?
Right, yeah.
And it's like, no, it's not. I don't tell just nice stories. I
hope you enjoy them, but
I assume that there is a level of enjoyment, but that becomes a huge part of it, is the idea that school should look and feel hard. School should look and feel like a job or a task. To me is the most sad commentary on the way we are doing education. My favorite is when I come to doing an exam, a review for an exam for the midterms, and we start talking about what they know. And they realize that we've spent weeks together and they know stuff.
Right.
Because they're like, and I've had students come up and say, I know stuff. Like you taught, we learn stuff. And it's like, yeah, but that's how education should be. When I was a young man and my uncles were teaching me, we learned how to hunt, but we learned how to hunt, and in order to learn how to hunt, you had to learn how to draw because we wouldn't speak. So we had to learn how to talk. And all of those things, sometimes I look back fondly and say, oh yeah, I had a great time. I know as a kid I didn't. My uncles remind me that I asked them, if I promise to never paint again, can I just go swimming at the quarry? And that there were things that they made me do.
Right.
And I look back at those with a fondness now that I'm sure wasn't there for anybody. And there are things that you just have to learn how to do. But for the most part, you should walk away from learning experiences, from educational experiences going, it was a blast,
Yeah.
And so I've done courses where I had people make drums, make rattles, paint, trying to find ways to engage other parts of their mind, which is how I was taught as an Anishinaabe, but it's also how the new science, the new educational sciences are saying, we don't actually just think with the rational side of our brain, and individuals learn different ways. So some person will learn by doing it over and over and over again. And so if you can create an environment over the term where you're trying a number of these, where you're going through and looking and saying, this is for the people who learn best with pictures. So if you're a visual learner, here's a piece. If you are a narrative learner, here's a piece. If you're a tactile learner, here's a piece. If you're going to learn better from the person beside you, we're going to try to do that in the classroom. And so, they won't work for everybody. And some people will say, that was the worst class I ever had. But the person next to them may say it's the best class they ever had. And trying to put all of it together, I think, is the obligation of calling yourself a teacher.
Yeah, and I really, I've really become over the last few years in my own teaching a firm believer that pushing people outside their comfort zone a little bit is great, right? And it's amazing if you allow them some opportunity for creativity in particular, that how many of the students will just rise to that occasion. Because that formulaic essay, they teach you in high school the 5-paragraph essay, right? The intro, your 3 points in each paragraph, and then your conclusion, right? And it's all very formulaic. And that's okay if you need to get the information down. It's a good structure to kind of keep in mind. But if you give them that room for creativity to explore different opportunities and different ways of thinking, that they can really engage in those, in critical thinking and approaching topics from a variety of perspectives, which of course is most useful when you get out into the world of work, right? That to just follow that formula all the time doesn't necessarily always work for them. So.
And I think when you actually step out into the real world, that formula almost never works.
Yeah.
And so within the legal profession, they're constantly coming to the academy and saying they need to be more prepared to be lawyers,
right,
or to use their legal education. In the business world, they're constantly coming to the academy and saying, you have to prepare them better for the real world. I'm not necessarily sure that that's correct.
Right.
I think this needs to be a space. This needs to be like a haven where you can think thoughts that you're not going to have an opportunity in the business world. But I think that is a conversation that needs to go on. It's a conversation where people need to be able to say, okay, these are the skills that I'm going to have. And critical thinking is where that happens. It's not necessarily knowing the answer, the stock answer, the answer that's going to be on the exam. Rather, it's being able to say, I know how to think, tactically. I know how to think strategically, so that when I am in a place where I don't have a stock answer and I don't have a textbook that says this is the answer, I will still be okay.
Right.
And in some ways, that's the greatest gift we can give a student, is the ability to say, no matter what the world throws at me at the end of my 4 years, I'll be okay. And that comes from that ability to experience being educated, learning in a different form.
Right.
Or in as many different forms as possible. So making them get out of their seats, or, I remember when I first came here and I was teaching Introduction to Native American Studies. And the last class I actually had powwow dancers come in, and I stood up and I sang a potlatch song, and we brought in elders, and it ended with every student being given the opportunity to smudge. Mm. Again, it's that idea of those comfort zones and making them step outside of their comfort zone. I would never force a student to do the smudge, but they did have to be present, so see what it is that you are choosing to not do.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, my invitation to them was always, step just outside your comfort zone. So your comfort zone. When you're saying, I'm not comfortable with this. Step just outside that. But the amazing thing about being willing to step just outside your comfort zone is that you've created a whole new comfort zone as soon as you do. Right. So as soon as you take one step out, your comfort zone is still one step away. I worked with a group, the Pacific Center for Leadership, where they would send people up on ropes and climbing poles to stand on a little disc at the top of a telephone pole to look around. All done with harnesses and stuff. It wasn't like, see what happens. How's that work for you? So very safe, very secure. but people, despite the fact that they would be in a harness, they would be all, and they would have professionals who were very good at making sure they were going to be safe, could not bring themselves to even step on a ladder.
Right.
And so they would say, I just don't want to be there. I don't want anything to do with this. And the ask I would always put to them is, step just outside. So where does your discomfort begin? And it's like, the idea of stepping on the ladder. Okay, so we won't talk about stepping on the ladder. But could we put you in the harness?
Right.
And we're not near the ladder, but we're going to put you in a harness that's attached to a rope that's 25 feet in the air. So the rope is 25 feet in the air, but you're firmly on the ground. And then they would say, if I could get them that far, it's down a road of discomfort, but if I could get them to the place where they were willing to step into the harness.
Right.
And then it's like, so we've now gone past your comfort zone. Could we walk over to the ladder? Could you touch the ladder? And in some cases, that may be where it ends.
Right.
But in other cases, I had individuals who managed to go up the ladder, and even stand at the top of a telephone pole and jump off, despite the fact that they were terrified of heights. But it's that level of, we think, and our rational mind tells us that our comfort zone is here, but the reality is our ability to go so far beyond it just needs to be gently moved through.
Right. Yeah, and that's such a great example of, tapping into potential, right? Human potential. So that's really, really great. So what are some of your favorite assignments or even courses that you teach, and why are they your favorites?
So the suite of courses that I am now responsible for are Indigenous negotiations, Indigenous project management, Indigenous leadership and management, and introduction to Indigenous business and governance.
Right.
And to me, in some way, because I was given the opportunity to sort of create those courses, so they truly tap into a number of really important things for me. One is the idea of reconciliation. So the courses that I create, that I got to create, and I think any course that I do, has to address that idea of reconciliation. And it has for years, long before 2016, when they said, oh, by the way, we should reconcile.
Right. It
was like I said, I'm Scottish and Anishinaabe. My life has been about reconciling
right.
those. But the idea that, again, that space where people can come out of their comfort zone. So the courses that I create, the courses that I work in are they're called Indigenous, but they're not for Indigenous students. They're for every student, and particularly in the idea of a business school. I look and I think, this is the way business is going to look. In Alberta, in British Columbia, across the country, if you are going to do business anywhere out of a city, you are going to be in someone's territory, you are going to want to work with Indigenous populations. We are the largest growing demographic. We are the fastest growing small business sector, and small business being up to 500 employees.
Oh, I didn't realize that's the definition of small business. Wow.
So large groups doing amazing things with a sense of power that people still aren't comfortable attributing to trying to do business, as a mining company, as a gas and oil company. So, you look at something like the pipeline, and knowing that there are 50 individual nations in British Columbia. So if you want to put a pipeline through British Columbia, that's an important thing to know.
Yes.
Being able to say, these are the names of the nations. Because one of the biggest struggles students have, one, entering the course, and two, sort of getting resolved in the course, I hope, is, so what do I call? Like, I want to do reconciliation. It seems like a good idea. I read the 94 calls to action. I'm at school to learn, but I don't want to take the course because I'm afraid that I'm going to hurt someone's feelings. I'm going to get yelled at. But because I'm going to make a mistake, because I'm going to use, the only term I know is Indian. So I'm going to use the term Indian, and I'm not sure that that's okay. So rather than find out, what I'm going to do is quietly not address it at all.
Right, yeah.
And so in my courses, I don't give them that answer because I don't know the answer. But them knowing that I stand up there and I say, this is the degrees that I have. This is who I am here recognized as a teacher for you. I am Anishinaabic. I don't know the right term. And I can show you the books to show you that we really just don't know the right term.
Right.
And you can feel, first of all, you can feel the tension raise when I say, let's talk about Indian, Aboriginal, First Nation, which is the right term.
Yeah.
You can feel the tension raise. And then when I say to them, I don't know the right term, you can feel it's like a pressure valve just goes.
Yeah.
Because then all we're doing is exploring together what those terms mean and why we're having so much trouble, and what, when I say the terms are loaded, it's like, okay, let's talk about that. And people suddenly can become comfortable because they don't have to know the answer. Right. Even the student who wants to know the exact answer, and when I say this textbook says this is the answer, but I disagree with the textbook. All of those things give permission,
right,
to be in the classroom and to question, to posit something different, to provide alternatives, and that's critical thinking, right? And that's what we want to send our graduates out with, is the ability to say, I don't know that I know the right answer, and it's okay to not know the right answer, but what about this? And I always think about the fact that my undergrads taught me to think that I knew an answer. Mm. My law degree taught me to say, it depends. Mm. My master's degree taught me to say, I'm not sure. And as I'm working through the PhD, it's teaching me to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
so
it's
true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I have a PhD. And it's almost saying, that's the permission to say I don't know.
Yeah.
But most people won't go that far. And I'm not sure I would recommend it to anyone. I think it's a great journey, and I've had a fascinating, but it's hard. And I don't think everyone has to go and get a PhD to have the ability to say, I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
And if we can do it at the undergrad level, that cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in education to get to the place where I could say, I don't know.
Yeah.
If we can teach it to them at an undergrad level, we've done a great service to everybody.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, like just the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, the more that you realize how complex every question that on the surface seems simple isn't, right? How complex all of these different things are. There's history, there's politics, there's, all sorts of things attached to everything. And it's great that that this is a goal that you have, is to have students not be afraid to ask the hard questions, and to be okay with the fact that I don't know the answer to that, because you know, you enter into a conversation anywhere in your life otherwise, that's a great starting point, right? Rather than a lot of the sort of this sense that, you know, you have to defend whatever partisan position or whatever, right? It may be a lot more productive, even in business, right?
Absolutely in business. Oh, and by the way, I should tell you, so the new correct term is Indigenous. The new politically correct term is Indigenous.
Yes.
I tell my students, I'm not comfortable with Indigenous.
Yes.
Which freaks them out. Because it's like, no, I just got told that it was right. And I've now told everybody that they're Indigenous. And so, you know, and what I do is I say, well, these are the reasons why I'm uncomfortable with it. There is no definition for Indigenous. And they're like, well, of course there's a definition, you know, and we can look and say, the UN says, and it's like, no, the UN has not recognized the definition. And their eyes get bigger. You know, what do you mean the UN hasn't? It's like they have definitions that they work with and around, but they've never actually said this is our definition.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
You know, and Canada does not have an definition of our Indigenous people. So I use Aboriginal, and I say I use Aboriginal, and this is why, and I can justify, you know, the Constitution. These are the reasons why I use that term. And if you're talking with me and you want to use something other than that term, you have to justify it. And if you can justify it, you know, because I've been in classrooms and I've spoken where I ask the question, you know, who is offended by Indigenous? Someone in a group of 25 people will be offended by the term. It's easy now because I'm the person who, so if I'm asking the question. But then if I say, what term would you prefer, and put it to that person, they may say First Nation, Native, Aboriginal, Indian, and I say, okay, justify it, and we can have that conversation. If I then turn and say, okay, so now we have First Nation, is everybody comfortable with that? Someone in that room will be uncomfortable with that term. And what it leads us to is a place where we can, as a group, say, okay, what are we going to use here while we're talking? And it does two things. One, it creates a level of comfort, but the other thing it does is actually provides everybody in the room with a whole set of tools, because they've had all of these conversations about all of these terms, so that wherever they go in the world, you know, if they're in Goose Bay, Labrador, and someone says, and they're working and they say, it's a pleasure to sit down with the Indigenous people, and someone says, I'm offended, you can actually have the conversation with them. And it's a great way to get yourself out of messes, because in a lot of cases, people are more than willing in the world, more than willing to give you a lot of slack. They just want to know that you're actually thinking and that you're not doing it out of ignorance or out of like uncaring. You know, so if you can say, well, actually, this is why I didn't use this term, and this is why, and this is why. So, you know, and I usually end the discussions we have is ask the people what term. So if you're working with a nation, ask them what term they prefer. You can always ask them a second time, oh, I forgot, what's your word for you? And they will happily tell you a second time. But if you do it a third time, then it looks like you just really don't care.
Right. Right. Oh, that's really interesting. And that's about, thinking, right? It's, I care. I want to be aware of all the perspectives and why. Yeah, and I can participate in that conversation. So those are such great skills in anything, Indigenous or not Indigenous conversations, Indigenous Aboriginal conversations, but I mean that applies so widely to a whole variety of different things that students will take into the world beyond their degree. So,
and I think in a lot of cases, students now are not so much. When I went to school, it was because there was a job at the end, right? It seems that students are coming into the classroom now because they want to know something, because they're trying to work stuff out. And that's what the classroom should be about. You know, when the Greeks actually formed the university, that's what it was for. It was, let's walk and talk and work stuff out, you know, and we'll have somebody who actually facilitates that, but doesn't own the conversation. You know, it's an interesting thing that we talk about it as a Socratic method, because that's exactly not what Socrates did. You know, it was pointing out spaces, and so the dialogues and all of that actually appear to be him standing and lecturing, but it's very much not what the university originally was. And it seems like students are coming for that, and that educators are being called on to rise to the occasion of saying, there needs to be more. Right. You know, you can't just stand in front of the classroom. I remember when I went to school, the profs would come and they had like 3-ring binders that with all yellow pages. And it wasn't that they got a yellow paper. It's just that the pages were that old.
Yes.
And they would turn the page, and that was what the topic was, and the topics never changed. The reason why the pages were yellowed is because they were that old. The topics never changed. The world of the academy never changed. Now, it seems that you have to address the fact that, you know, this is the newest information that I have. It came out yesterday, or it came on the way to school. Yeah. And it is, of course, relevant to what should be being talked about in the classroom. And if we are not making the knowledge, the data, let's go with data. Okay. The data that is they're being barraged, it's coming at them constantly. If we're not making all of that data relevant for them, or helping them make relevance of it, is probably a better way of putting it, we're failing. You know, and I say to my students, there are differences between, and it's not mine, I just use it. I don't know who I took it from, but right. there is data, and then there is information, and then there is knowledge. And what happens is, we can give you all of this data, and the data comes at you in all these ways. What we should be doing at the school, as a teacher, what I should be doing is helping you pick the filters that you put on the data. That is not going to help me make this choice. That is not going to help me on this next. So I'm going to lay a number of filters in front of and say, I don't need that. You know, and I do it on my email. I do it, you know, when I'm looking at my screens. I set up filters to say, I don't want this, I don't want this. But I do want this. I want to know about this piece of information. This is irrelevant. Once we collect a bunch of that information, so once we filter the data through the filters, that provides us with information. We have to then take another set of filters and refine it even more, and that actually gives us things that we know. And that really is what a specialization is about, is saying, I want to study geography. Well, as soon as you do that, you've put on a set of filters on all of the data that's coming out. I really don't want to know about drama.
Right.
So don't tell me anything about that. But I actually do need to know about English, because they're going to make me write a paper.
Right.
So you create that series of filters. And then as we move in and specialize, actually I'm doing geography, but I'm doing map making. I'm doing topical geography map making. As I do that, I'm putting on more filters, because even in the area of geography, I don't know everything, which is why when you get to be a doctor, you can say, I don't know that. That's not my area.
Yeah.
Right? So go down the hall. There's somebody there who has that specialization.
Yeah, and we're just inundated with information and data in our world, right? So I think it is a key aspect of a university education, is to help students figure out how to filter all of those things and get us to a point where you can make good decisions and logical decisions, and be able to explain yourself, where you're coming from and why you're making the choices that you're making, and try to convince others of those perspectives as well. So what do you think about the liberal education model of the University of Lethbridge when you're talking about this? Because you're talking about all of those pillars. So our pillars being interdisciplinarity, connectivity, critical thinking, and civic engagement. It sounds like all of your pedagogy is kind of immersed in these pillars as they've been set out and defined by the university. What do you think of the liberal education model of the University of Lethbridge? How does it work for your teaching?
I think that there is a level of standardization around, and don't get me wrong, I think the new Department of Liberal Education has done a great job of defining themselves and creating those pillars. For me, the university is in a unique position. So Lethbridge is actually surrounded by the Blackfoot Nation. And in some ways, you cannot help. It's like an osmosis. Blackfoot is here. And so for me, the approach is missing a pillar, and that pillar would be culture. And I don't necessarily think that culture is limited to the Blackfoot, because I think what happens is that actually sort of comes with this idea of indigenization of the institution. Indigenization is another one of those hard words where it's like, not really sure what it means, so I'm not sure when I'm going to get there. I'm not sure if we've accomplished it, because I'm not sure what it'll look like, so I don't even know what I'm... But we're in a unique position where, the Blackfoot have a very strong understanding of their culture. And that actually allows us, if we open ourselves up to invite that into the institution and into our understanding of liberal education, that opens up not just to the Blackfoot, but to every culture that comes forward. So that rather than indigenization, what we could be striving for is an idea of empathization.
Oh, interesting.
An idea where what we are doing together is better understanding everybody that we're coming in contact with. And if we can tweak that, if we can tweak this idea that you gave me a culture that I don't know, and there are rules that go with it. So when I'm teaching project management, one of the things that I address is this idea of, in project management, it is very specifically about best practices. And these are the best practices. And so in a regular project management course, what you do is you say, this is how you do a Gantt chart. This is how you do a work structure breakdown. And these are the best practices. These are in the culture of project management. They have worked for a very long time and determined that this is the best way to do a project. That works fine until you are on Blackfoot territory. Because we're only looking at the one culture. Lethbridge is in a unique position being surrounded because what we can do is say, so what would the rules be if this is the best practice? Does that work on Blackfoot territory? And when we can hear the answer, I mean, first you have to ask the question, then you can hear the answer. When you can hear that answer and the answer is, no, it wouldn't work here because culturally we would do this differently. This person could not be responsible for this thing because of our culture. Being attuned to the territory, being attuned to the location, takes it out of the realm of best practice and brings it into a place that's called, I mean, this is my definition, but it's wise practices. It's looking and saying, I hear what is going on. I recognize that culture in the Western culture of project management, this is the best practice. Is there another set? And if you turn up the volume on the surrounding area and the culture that we are really sort of immersed in, then we can start to say, oh, actually, that won't work here. And it does or should come into our classrooms. We should be looking and saying, so in my classrooms, I'm actually using Blackfoot story. And I've made mistakes because there are certain things that aren't to be spoken of. But I was told them, because I read it in a textbook.
Right.
And so I spoke about it, but because I was open to that culture, because I was attuned and sensitive to hearing it, the Blackfoot students in my classroom came up and said, you know, you're not supposed to say that. And that is the piece of a liberal education that's the fifth pillar that actually would help hold the rest of it. The great thing about the idea of a wise practice is that we are right now in Blackfoot, and because it is such a strong and powerful and pervasive culture, it's easy to hear here. If you are working anywhere else, not only in Canada, but in the world, once you have that skill, that sort of, if that has become part of your liberal education, you can go anywhere.
Right.
Because you're not attuned, you're not looking for the answer to how to do this correctly. You're attuned to the fact that the culture is different. You're attuned to, and so for me, that's the other pillar that I would add. And so I spoke about this last year, and I was saying, and I would do it as a teepee. I would do it as the first 5 poles of the teepee, because whenever we talk about the pillars, it always look Greco-Roman. And I love Greco-Roman. However, it's time that the institution moved and morphed. So that would be
that's interesting.
The addition.
Right.
What they have, how we're describing liberal education, I think addresses so much. What we're missing is the opportunity to talk about the fact that we can teach people how to listen for the cultural cues. And that is a great gift.
Yes, and applicable so widely.
Everywhere.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If at the end of the student's degree, as they're walking across the convocation stage, I love this question. I love talking to my colleagues and asking this question. What are the key lessons, or maybe just a single lesson, whatever it might be, that you're hoping that that is deeply embedded in them and that they're going to take with them out into the world once they're beyond the university?
So I try to go to every convocation.
Yeah, I think great. I love convocation.
I love wearing the regalia. I love the students. I love the faces of the students as they're wearing their regalia, and the sense of accomplishment. One of the students who I knew for a number of years, so at some point they become like your kids.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I years ago I had because I occasionally in my classrooms I'll say, well, my kids.
Right.
And I had an elder who was taking the class come up and say, when you're talking about the kids, are you including me? And I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, I am. And she said, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that I was included.
Oh, that's great.
And so when they're walking across, as it's my kids that are walking across, I went to go and like hug someone because I was so proud that they had managed. And I realized for the first time that that's probably the first time they've ever been on a convocation. And it freaked them right out. And it was like, okay, I better not do that anymore. I'll just quietly stand here. But because I want them, it is that idea of you want to run over and you want to like tell them that they're not alone and tell them that, it's an experience, it's their experience, but it's an experience that their family and, that walk across the stage seems very lonely, but at the same time, you can hear their families, and you want them to know that they're not alone, that, and the Alumni Society works very hard to do this, to say you are now part of a larger organization, you are now part of a larger body, you are part of the University of Lethbridge family, you are, and I'm not sure there's enough times you can tell the students that it is, a journey that we've been on together. And when I say they're like my kids, it's because I feel like, the uncle who helped them figure out some stuff and now they're heading out. And yeah, just that idea of you're not alone and right. it's all going to be okay.
And it's so exciting, and it's so exciting to watch them develop when you have them in first year, second year, third year, fourth year, or even first year to third year, and you just look at them and wonder, and they're like, oh, this is so proud to be part of that process of your life and be part of an institution that helps you develop in those ways. It's very, very exciting.
Because a lot of times in my classes, the question will come up, so is it this or is it this? And the answer I always give is yes.
Right.
And whenever in a classroom, they start answering back. So if I ask the question, so should we do it this way or this way? Do you want the exam before the break or after the break? They will say yes. And when they put it back at you, there's this moment of like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. You did learn, and it's always so much, there's this beautiful quality of being able to understand that they figured it out, that it's not a very quick answer. And even if they are the type of person who wants that, what's going to be on the exam, if it's that student, at the end of the 4 years, they've realized that that's the type of person they are and that there are other options.
Right, yeah.
And that puts them in a much better position.
Yes. Yeah.
To sort of be in the world.
Right.
I actually had a former student send me ask a request for a reference, could I be the reference? And they said, in case you don't remember me, I am the student who was never comfortable with the open-endedness of the questions. I was the one who wanted I always wanted and I was laughing because I was thinking, oh, that was enough to figure out who.
Yeah.
I knew who they were, but it's like there's always students who are going to feel like that. And part of it is institutionally we set that up. You know, high schools set that up. Education from K to 12 sets up that idea that there is an answer, and that if you just put the right answer, you can get 100%. And I think that's a disservice. What I would much prefer is students to be able to look at the world, to be able to look and say, I have an answer. You know, I don't know that and I will make that answer right. And that really is how the best way to sort of write a paper, to do a presentation, is to say, here's my answer. And this is why my answer is right. This is why my answer is good enough. It's, you know, justify what you're saying. Prove to me. It may not be the answer that I would think is correct, but if you can prove it, that's good enough.
Well reasoned with evidence, and then I will listen to what you have to say, because it's a thoughtful answer. It's
a thoughtful answer, and we live in a post-truth time.
We do.
But we've always lived in that.
True.
There's always been more than one truth. Although I do remember listening to CBC the day that they announced, they were saying Oxford came up, it's post-truth.
Oh, right.
And I was very excited because it was the word of the year in 2016.
Okay.
The year that the TRC report came out. So in my mind I went, oh,
truth and reconciliation.
Post-truth. We now have the truth. What do we do now that we have the truth? I was very excited.
Right.
And then after station identification, they came back and said, so post-truth means, what do you do now that the truth doesn't matter?
And you're like, what?
Oh, and I was so broken as I'm driving, listening to CBC. It's like, how can that be?
Right.
But we've always lived where there were some truths that were given more weight than others. But the most successful people are the ones, in my mind, who find the right story, find a story that resonates with them, find what makes sense to them, and walks the world with that.
Right.
Saying, this is my truth, and here's the story that I have to back it up. And to me, it's like, that's the right answer. So,
right.
And that's what I hope my students manage.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we're out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It was
very fun. Thanks for listening to me ramble for, it's like, hey, can he talk that long? Yes, he can.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.